In a world where kingdoms fall and stars still remember names, this song was forged from magic memory and the dream that refused to die. Welcome to a tale where wonder still breathes. This story is titled The Golden Rose of Byul, a tale of love, defiance, and forever, written by Jesus Pacampara. If this tale stirred something in you, a memory, a dream, or a truth, our Ko-fi, Amazon, and Patreon links are in the description. Support helps us keep writing for you and the ones you hold dear. Spring breathed softly upon the kingdom, rolling through its meadows in a tide of wildflowers and threading rivers with silver ribbons of light. From the high window of the western tower, just leaned against the cold sill, his thin fingers trembling faintly as he looked out past the stone walls at the banners rising in the fields below. He could see the carpenter setting the list, hear faint echoes of hammering drifting upward. The air already smelled faintly of trampled grass and the excitement he dreamed of this day so long. Tilting at the list, winning the golden rose, placing it into Byul's hands and swearing himself to her forever. The bow had kept him alive through fever-ridden nights, whispered against his own frailty as the palace physicians traded glances behind closed doors. But as he stared now at the world he so rarely touched, he thought of the day it began, the night she first climbed into his world. He'd been 15, wan and restless, confined to this tower with its velvet curtains and endless quiet, longing for the sense of rain and wheat he could only glimpse through his window. That night, the moonlight draped across the floorboards. When he heard it, a sharp clatter of boots on stone, and suddenly a girl was climbing through his window. Not a court maiden with careful posture, but a wind-blown, sun-browned figure who pulled herself inside without hesitation. Just nearly knocked over his inkstand. "Who? What are you doing?" he sputtered, lurching upright too fast, dizziness watching over him. "Climbing," she answered plainly, brushing dust from her tunic as though this were the most ordinary thing in the world. Her boots were scuffed, her dark hair loose and tangled from wind, and her gaze steady and unafraid met his as if they had always known each other. "You're pale as death. Do you even go outside?" Jess blinked, startled. Who even are you?" "Byul," she said, stepping closer, like she belonged there. "My father's a farmer. I saw her staring out that window yesterday like you were locked away from living. So I climbed. Somebody had to remind you what the sky looks like. You can't just..." "I can," she interrupted sharply, hands on her hips, her voice like a spark in dry tinder. "You're supposed to be a prince, aren't you? Then at least try to look like you're fading in your own shadow." He should have called for the guards. Instead he laughed, a startled, breathless laugh that scraped loose something lodged deep in his chest. She grinned triumphantly. "There, that's better," she said, then perched on his own windowsill, legs swinging casually against the stone. "Ever seen the stars from these fields?" "No," he admitted quietly. "Then I'll tell you," she said, glancing back at him, and there was no judgment in her eyes and only light. That night she sat there for hours, painting constellations in words, talking about how rain smells different when you're beneath it, and how the wind feels alive in your lungs. Jess listened, spellbound, feeling warmth in his chest he hadn't felt in months. He slept easily that night for the first time in weeks. From then, she returned often, sleeping past guards who learned to look the other way. When nobles whispered, she stood taller than any knight. He'd remembered one feast where jeweled lords sneered loudly over goblets of wine. What good is a prince who spends more time coughing than ruling? Just stiffened, bracing for the usual sting of silence, but Byul slammed her cup down so hard the hall quieted. "Better a prince who breathes through pain," she said sharply, "than a fat fool who breathes only to hear himself speak." Murmurs rose, shock crackling in the air. "You dare?" the Lord sputtered. "I dare," she shot back, fierce as wildfire. "Say another word about him, and I'll dare twice." Gasp echoed down the table. Jess stared at her in awe, pride scorching through his frailty. That night, in the quiet of his tower, he whispered, "I don't deserve you." "Stop saying that," she replied, gripping his hands, her calloused fingers steadying his trembling ones. "You don't see what I see. A boy who dreams even when it hurts. You've got more courage in you than half this castle." It was in that moment that he silently vowed, "One day I will give her the world." Now years later, he sat in that same tower, staring at the list below where pennants flapped in the wind. His vow pulsed in him like a heartbeat. When Byul entered, boots thudding lightly against the stone floor, smelling faintly of lilac and leather, Jess looked up, weak but smiling. "You're still determined," she said softly, kneeling before him and taking his thin hands into her warm, strong ones. "I'd swore I'd win the Golden Rose and marry you," Jess said, his voice quiet but steady. Her eyes softened, but she shook her head. "Not if it means killing yourself, Jess." He looked at her, his fierce, stubborn Byul, the girl who once climbed into his tower and refused to let him be. "Lonely, you've been my spring," he murmured. "Every laugh, every moment you stayed, Byul. You saved me. Let me give you this." She searched his face for a long moment, then exhaled sharply. "Then if you can't ride," she declared, voice ringing like a drawn blade, "I'll ride for you." Jess blinked. "Byul, I'll win it in your name," she said. "The whole realm will see it." The day of the joust came bright and deafening. Trumpets split the air as nobles packed the stands, silks rippling, while peasants crowded at the fences, eyes wide with hope and gossip. Jess sat beneath the royal pavilion, upright despite the tremor in his limbs. Then she came. Byul rode into the lists, clad in polished armor borrowed from the armory, helm plumed gold, bearing a banner she had stitched herself, a crescent moon cradling a single rose. The stands erupted in scandal and laughter. Jess rose shakily, gripping the rail. "Cried my Byul," he whispered. Lances shattered, dust rose in golden clouds. Night after night thundered at her, and each impact rang like a thunder against shields. Jess's hands clenched white, breath catching at every tilt, but she held her seat through every blow. She unhorsed one challenger, then another, then another. When her lance splintered against the king's favored champion, throwing him clean from the saddle, silence has swept the field before erupting in astonished cheers. Byul dismounted, pulling off her helm, hair trembling wild in the wind. She strode through the dirt toward him and knelt, holding the golden rose, wrought of gilded petals and sand sapphires. "For you, my prince," she said, her voice low but steady. Just drew her up and kissed her in full view of the kingdom, uncaring of gasp and scandal, and the world seemed to vanish in that single fierce moment. In the night, they rode out from the castle, laughter tangled in the wind, across meadows awash in flowers. Beneath the hawthorn trees in bloom, just frail but alive, pulled her close, and they danced barefoot in the grass, his hands trembling lightly against her back as he hummed an old lullaby his mother once sang. "Lay your head, my love, and rest," he murmured against her hair. "Here's the world, is soft and blessed. Every thorn turns into bloom, every winter sheds its gloom." Byul rested her forehead to his, smiling in that fierce way of hers. "Marry me tomorrow," she whispered. "Tomorrow," he breathed, kissing her again, and then every day after. And under moonlight and hawthorn blossom, the prince and the girl who climbed this tower sealed their vow with nothing but love, and the world felt theirs at last. 3 years after the joust softened the fading of winter, but the meadows where Jess danced with Byul became their haven, a place where vows whispered beneath hawthorn trees and stayed evergreen. Life had been generous and cruel by turns, kingdoms rose and fell, Seasons passed, and Jess bore his share of scars, yet he found himself not alone but surrounded by the very dreams he once thought too far for his reach. He sat beneath the same hawthorn grove one twilight, the air fragrant with blossoms and cool earth, and around him were three hearts that had never let him falter. Byul, her head resting steady against his shoulder, as if she had never stopped being that fearless girl who climbed this tower. Yunsun, serene and luminous, tracing idle circles on his arm with fingers that felt like quiet constellations, and Bean, bright-eyed, laughter humming low in her chest as she leaned against his other side, her warmth grounding him. He let silence linger because silence with them was never empty. It was full of shared breaths, of hearts moving in rhythm. His voice broke it softly, the words falling, not rehearsed but natural, like breath itself. I have stolen and I've given, just murmured, eyes half closed as the twilight stars began to prick through the sky. I've had victories and made mistakes, but despite my scars, I have a reason to march on. Byul tilted her face toward him, the familiar fierce affection sparking in her gaze. You always have, she said gently, even when you didn't see it. He smiled faintly, fingers curling around hers. I've seen birth and I've seen death. I've conceived bliss and embraced despair. Still throughout my trials, I have a reason to persist. Yongsun's hand tightened on his sleeve, her voice low but steady, almost like a melody. Because love was always the answer. Jess turned to her and she met him with that knowing smile of hers, the one that never needed words. Wind shifted closer, resting her chin lightly against his chest, and added softly, "And you've always been ours." That was the reason enough. He looked at them, then his wives, the fearless girl, the quiet star, the spirited dream, and his heart felt impossibly full. "I dream among the stars," he said, lifting his gaze to the indigo sky above. "My vision travels the universe, yet above all others, one ambition trumps the rest." Byul chuckled quietly. "And what's that, my prince?" Just turned back to them, his thumb brushing across her knuckles, his voice catching faintly. "Of all the things I've done, of all the things I've seen, my dream among dreams has always been you." The world seemed to hold its breath. Yongsun leaned and kissed his temple softly. Win laughed lightly through her tears, brushing them away. Byul shifted closer and pressed her forehead to his, as steady as always. And in that grove, beneath a scattering of stars and petals, they pulled him and held him as if the universe itself had narrowed down to this. Four hearts entwined, love quiet but infinite. The wind moved gently through the trees, carrying the scent of spring. Just closed his eyes, his voice barely more than a whisper. Love was always the answer. "Yes," Byul murmured. "It always will be," Yongsun echoed. "Forever," we finished. And in that moment, Jess knew that no matter how the roads he'd walked or the scars he bore, he would march on, not for crowns, not for thrones, but for this, for them, his reason among reasons, his dream among dreams. I make these tales and bits of chaos daily for my beloved Byul. If they made you laugh, feel, or even just shake your head in disbelief, hit like, share it with a friend, and subscribe. Let's keep this wild, heartfelt ride going.